Hello, my amazing children. This is Grandma Carla, and this is The Trumpet of the Swan by E.B. White. We are on Chapter 12, A Rescue. Lewis liked to sleep on the lake. At night, after blowing taps, he would waddle down to the sandy beach by the dock. There he removed his slate, his chalk pencil, and his trumpet, and hid them under a bush. Then he shoved off into the water. As soon as he was afloat, he would tuck his head under a wing. For a while he would doze and think about home and his parents. Then he would think about Serena, how beautiful she was and how much he loved her. Pretty soon he would be fast asleep. When daylight came, he would swim ashore and eat a light breakfast of water plants. Then he'd put on his things, climb onto the flat rock, and blow reveille. The boys, hearing the trumpet, would wake and rush to the dock to swim before breakfast. After supper at night, the campers would often play volleyball. Lewis loved the game. He couldn't hop around as fast as the boys, but he could reach far out with his long neck and poke the ball into the air and over the net. It was very hard to get a ball past Lewis. He could return almost any shot. When the boys chose sides at the start of the game, Lewis was always the first to be chosen. The boys loved camp life in Ontario. They learned how to handle a canoe. They learned to swim. Sam Beaver took them on nature walks and taught them to sit quietly on a log and observe wild creatures and birds. He showed them how to walk in the woods without making a lot of noise. Sam showed them where the kingfisher has his net, in the hole of the bank of the stream. He showed them the partridge and her chicks. When the boys heard a soft coo-coo-coo-coo, Sam told them that they were listening to the saw-whet owl, smallest of the owls, no bigger than a man's hand. Sometimes in the middle of the night, the whole camp would wake up to the scream of a wildcat. Nobody ever saw a wildcat during the entire summer, but his scream was heard at night. One morning, when Sam was playing tennis with Applegate Skinner, Sam heard a clanking noise. He looked behind him, and there, coming out of the woods, was a skunk. The skunk's head was stuck in a tin can. He couldn't see where he was going. He kept bumping into trees and rocks, and the can went clank, clank, clank. "That skunk is in trouble," said Sam, laying down his racket. "He's been to the dump looking for food. He poked his head into that empty can, and now he can't get it out." The word spread quickly through the camp that a skunk had arrived. The boys came running to see the fun. Mr. Brickle warned them not to get too close. The skunk might squirt them with perfume. So the boys danced around, keeping their distance and holding their noses. The big question was how to get that can off the skunk's head without getting squirted. "He's going to need help," said Sam. "That skunk will starve to death if we don't get that can off." All the boys had suggestions. One boy said that they should make a bow and arrow, tie a string to the arrow, and shoot the arrow at the can. Then when they hit the can, they could pull the string and the can would come off the skunk's head. Nobody thought much of that suggestion. It sounded too much like work. Another boy suggested that two boys climb a tree, and one boy could hang by his feet from the other boy's hands, and when the skunk walked under the tree, the boy who was hanging by his feet could reach down and pull the can off, and if the skunk squirted, the perfume wouldn't hit the boy because he would be hanging in the air. Nobody thought much of that suggestion. Mr. Brickle didn't like it at all. He said it was... My goodness, they did it again. They messed up the pages again. This book was not edited very well. They have 108. Oh my goodness. Okay, there's another 101. And there's another 108. How odd. This is really a strangely put together book. Okay, so said it was. So we've lost another page of our book. Very strange. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next page after that. Oops, it looks like the skunk must have squirted. because it says the air smelled strong of skunk. Mr. Brickle smelled too. "Congratulations, Sam," said Mr. Brickle. "You have aided a wild creature and have given Camp Kookooskoos a delicious dash of wild perfume. I'm sure we'll all remember this malodorous event for a long time to come. I don't see how we can very well forget it." "Go-ho!" cried Louis, lifting his trumpet. The lake echoed with the sound, and the air was heavy with a rich, musky smell of skunk. The boys danced and danced, holding their noses. Some of them held their stomachs and pretended to throw up. Then Mr. Brickle announced it was time for the morning swim. "A swim will clear the air," he said as he walked away toward his cottage to change his clothes. So I guess Mr. Brickle got squirted by the skunk. After lunch each day, the campers went to their tents for a rest period. Some of them read books. Some of them wrote letters home telling their parents how bad the food was. Some just lay in their cots and talked. One afternoon during rest period, the boys in Applegate's tent began teasing him about his name. "Applegate Skinner," said one boy. "Where did you get such a crazy name, Applegate?" "My parents gave it to me," replied Applegate. "I know what a name is," said the other boy. "Sour Applegate, Sour Applegate Skinner." The boys howled at this and began chanting, "Sour Applegate, Sour Applegate, Sour Applegate." "Quiet," bellowed the tent leader. "I don't think it's funny," said Applegate. "His name isn't Sour Applegate," whispered another boy. "His name is Wormy Applegate, Wormy Applegate Skinner." This suggestion was greeted with screams of laughter. "Quiet," bellowed the tent leader. "I want quiet in this tent. Leave Applegate alone." "Leave rotten Applegate alone," whispered another boy, and some of the other boys had to pull their pillows over their heads so that their snickering could not be heard. Applegate was sore. When the rest period was over, he wandered down to the dock. He didn't like being made fun of, and he wanted to do something to get even. Without saying anything to anybody, he slid the canoe into the water and paddled out into the lake, heading for the opposite shore a mile away. Nobody noticed him. Applegate had no business taking a canoe out alone. He had not passed his swimming test. He had not passed his canoe test. He was disobeying a camp rule. When he was a quarter of a mile from shore in deep water, the wind grew stronger. The waves got higher. The canoe was hard to manage. Applegate got scared. Suddenly, a wave caught the canoe and spun it around. Applegate leaned hard on his paddle. His hand slipped, and he lost balance. The canoe tipped over. Applegate found himself in the water. His clothes felt terribly soggy and heavy. His shoes dragged him down, and he could barely keep his head above water. Instead of hanging on to the canoe, he started swimming toward shore, which was a crazy thing to do. One wave hit him square in the face, and he got a mouthful of water. "Help!" he screamed. "Help me! I'm drowning! It'll give the camp a bad name if I drown! Help! Help!" Counselors sprinted to the waterfront. They jumped into canoes and rowboats and started for the drowning boy. One counselor kicked his moccasins off, dove in, and began swimming toward Applegate. Mr. Brickle raced to the dock, climbed to the diving tower, and directed the rescue operation, shouting through a megaphone. "Hang on to the canoe, Applegate!" he shouted. "Don't leave the canoe!" But Applegate had already left the canoe. He was all alone, thrashing about and wasting his strength. He felt sure he would soon go to the bottom and drown. He felt weak and scared. Water had come into his lungs. He couldn't last much longer. The first boat to get away from the dock was rowed by Sam Beaver, and Sam was pulling hard at the oars, straining every muscle, but things did not look good for Applegate. The boats were still a long way away. When the first cry of help was heard in the camp, Louis was coming around the corner of the main lodge. He spied Applegate immediately and responded to the call. "I can't fly out there," thought Louis, "because my flight feathers have been falling out lately, but I can certainly make better time than those boats." Dropping his slate and his chalk pencil and his trumpet, Louis splashed into the water and struck out, beating his wings and kicking with the great webbed feet. A swan, even in summer when he can't fly, can scoot across the water at high speed. Lewis's powerful wings beat the air. His feet churned the waves as though he were running on top of the water. In a moment he had passed all the boats. When he reached Applegate, he quickly dove, pointed his long neck between Applegate's legs, then came to the surface with Applegate sitting on his back. Cheers came from the people on the shore and in the boats. Applegate clung to Lewis's neck. He had been saved in the nick of the time. Another minute and he would have drowned. Okay, so here we have another lost page of the book, which is most frustrating. Well, at least I read ahead and we don't have any more missed pages after this. The boys jumped up and down. We will never forget this day. The reputation of the camp has been saved. Our record for safety is still untarnished. Lewis didn't pay much attention to all the shouting. He swam very carefully over to Sam's boat, and Sam pulled Applegate into the boat and helped him into the stern seat. You look pretty funny riding a swan, Sam said, and you're lucky to be alive. You're not supposed to go out into a canoe alone. But Applegate was too scared and wet to say anything. He just sat and stared straight ahead, spitting water out of his mouth and breathing hard. At supper that night, Mr. Brickle placed Lewis at the right in the place of honor. When the meal was over, he rose and made a speech. We all saw what happened on the lake today. Applegate Skinner broke a camp rule, took a canoe out alone, and upset. He was drowning when Lewis the Swan, rapidly outdistancing all other campers, reached his side, held him up, and saved his life. Let us all give Lewis a standing ovation. The boys and the counselors stood up. They cheered and clapped and beat on tin pans with spoons. Then they sat down, and Lewis looked embarrassed. And now, Applegate, said Mr. Brickle, I hope the rescue has caused you to change your opinion of birds. The first day you were here in camp, you told us you didn't care for birds. How do you feel now? I feel sick at my stomach, replied Applegate. It makes you sick at your stomach to almost drown. My stomach still has a lot of lake water in it. Yes, but what about birds, said Mr. Brickle. Applegate thought hard for a minute. Well, he said, I'm grateful to Lewis for saving my life, but I still don't like birds. Really, said Mr. Brickle, that's quite remarkable. Even though a bird saved you from drowning, you don't care for birds. What have you got against birds? Nothing, replied Applegate. I have nothing against them. I just don't care for them. Okay, said Mr. Brickle. I guess we'll just have to leave it at that. But the camp is proud of Lewis. He is our most distinguished counselor, a great trumpet player, a great bird, and a powerful swimmer and a fine friend. He deserves a medal. In fact, I intend to write a letter recommending that he be given the life-saving medal. Mr. Brickle did as he promised. He wrote a letter. A few days later, a man arrived from Washington with the life-saving medal, and while all the campers watched, he hung the medal around Lewis's neck, alongside the trumpet, the slate, and the chalk pencil. It was a beautiful medal. Engraved on it were the words, "To Lewis the Swan, who, with outstanding courage and complete disregard for his own safety, saved the life of Applegate Skinner." Lewis took off the slate and wrote, "Thank you for the medal. It is a great honor." But he thought to himself, I'm beginning to get overloaded with stuff around my neck. I've got a trumpet, I've got a slate, I've got a chalk pencil, and now I've got a medal. I'm beginning to look like a hippie. I suppose I'll still be able to fly. I hope I'll still be able to fly when my flight feathers grow back in. That night, when darkness came, Lewis blew the most beautiful taps he had ever blown. The man who had brought the medal was listening and watching. He could hardly believe his ears and his eyes. When he returned to the city, he told the people what he had seen and heard. Lewis's fame was growing. His name was known. People all over were beginning to talk about the swan who could play a trumpet. So that is the end of The Rescue. Let's see if we can find our pictures. If there are any pictures. You know what? I bet you the picture were the pages that were missing, because there's no pictures in that one. But the good news is there are no more missing pages in this book. I've already checked. So, this is Grandma Carla, and I love you.